Hello, my beautiful gemstones. Before I start this video, I just want to say I was sitting here in editing, getting ready to edit the video, and realized I only made it halfway through. So I put on the same shirt. This is what I'm wearing today. I already had my hair in. I'm not changing. So halfway through the video, I'm going to look a little different. I'm sorry. It is 3 days later. I don't know how I didn't remember that I didn't film it, but I'm not taking my wig off, fixing my hair, doing my hair, making sure everything's perfect. It won't take away from the video. I'm not going to mention it in the video. It's just going to go from one shot to another, but it's not going to mess anything up. It just might seem weird if I didn't hop in here beforehand and tell you guys about it. All right. Love ya. Enjoy the video. What is up, my beautiful gemstones? Welcome back to my channel. And if you're new here, just welcome. My name is Gemma Jade, but today we are going to be discussing the exorcisms of Emma Schmidt and Robbie Manheim. So this was supposed to be night 7 of the 7 nights of Halloween. I have been under a little bit of a spiritual attack. I talk about it in Afternoon Talk on Halloween, which is the live stream I did with Ghost Dragons EW. If you want to know more about what's going on with me, check that out. I've got some, and these did not come from my own nails. I know the skeptics are going to say that you're going to chew me up and spit me out in the comments, but my nails are long, not sharp, okay? I need to take a little bit of time off, do some protection, put some protection mechanisms in place. So I am releasing this video Monday, 11 a.m. on November 6th. And it cannot be released on Halloween for several different reasons. Moving on, I've talked a lot about demons, possession, so-called demon houses, and things like that throughout the course of my YouTube career in a lot of videos. And I know that you guys enjoy that type of content, so I try to put as much out as possible. But when I put so much out while also under so much other stress, going through so many other things in life, and I forget, even knowing better to protect myself, sometimes things even happen to me. The cases we're going to discuss today, one of them is a lot lesser known, and the two of them are not connected, but I thought, you know, why not give it a shot and try to make this one a bit longer than my videos have been. So that's why I combined two completely unrelated cases. I wanted you guys to have a longer video because the 7 nights of Halloween, those 6 videos, and my Monday upload last week was very, very short because I was trying to put everything together. So without further ado, thank you for letting me ramble. I bring to you all today the exorcism of Emma Schmidt and the exorcism of Robbie Manheim. About an hour east of Omaha, Nebraska, there lies a small, somewhat shy and quiet town called Erling, Iowa. The charming little spot on the map has a little less than 500 people living there, and if it wasn't for what happened to one young woman there in the early 1900s, it's more than likely no one would ever mention this town had they not been from there and experienced what happened. Much like many Midwestern towns, Erling was built around a railroad. It was plated between 1881 and 1882 when the Chicago, St. Paul, and Milwaukee Railroad laid tracks through the state of Idaho. However, unlike many Midwestern towns, Erling played host to a somewhat special guest, at least for a little while early on in the 20th century. It brought in, somehow, the devil itself. Emma Schmidt, who was referred to as Anna Eklund in the Catholic Church-sanctioned publication Satan Be Gone by Father Carl Vogel, was born and grew up in Marathon, Wisconsin. It's alleged that her Aunt Mina was a witch who would place special herbs and other things in Emma's food without the girl's knowledge to spell and or curse her. Nobody knows why she would have been doing this, but a lot of people speculate that this is how it all started. So allegedly, immediately after the aunt started putting these cursed or spelled herbs and stuff in Emma's food, some do say that she did not do this and it happened by some other means. Emma's behavior began to change rather drastically either way and regardless of how it got started. She was deeply religious and attended a Catholic school. However, by the time she turned 14 years old, she was repulsed and disgusted by the Holy Communion and expressed her desire to not only attack priests, but also to destroy religious objects in the church itself while she was there. Her family took her to see several doctors and medical professionals, but there was nothing anyone could do for her. No one understood what was happening to the once highly religious, deeply repentant, quote-unquote good girl, and her parents quickly became desperate but had nowhere else to turn. Once they realized no one in the medical community was going to help Emma, her family called Father Theophilus Reisinger to perform the rites of exorcism. That happened in 1912. When approached with blessed items, she responded violently, and it was only with blessed items that she did this. When she was prayed over in Latin, she responded similarly. Father Reisinger quickly noticed that despite the fact that she was actually considered undereducated for her age, Emma could speak not only Latin herself, but German as well. He did come to the conclusion that the Latin could have come from her education at the Catholic school she had attended almost her entire life, and that the German influence could have come from the fact that her hometown in Wisconsin had a very large German population where she could have been exposed to and possibly taught that particular language. Now, this was just alternate theories other than exorcism the father was trying to come up with. It's not very likely that she picked up fluent Latin by attending Catholic school when she did not take Latin as like an elective, and it wasn't just automatically taught. And a German influence in your community does not teach you how to speak German fluently. However, and despite all this, he was dumbfounded and at a loss for how the little girl was able to fluently and perfectly speak not only Latin and German, but Hebrew, Polish, and Italian as well. That's 6 languages this child was speaking fluently in response to the attempted exorcisms done on her by Father Reisinger. And there was no way at all someone her age from that place in that time, and keeping in mind she was considered undereducated, should have been able to do that. No one had ever heard her speaking those languages before he would try to exorcise her, and it was terrifying for everyone involved from the very beginning. Eventually, though, Reisinger did get through the exorcism, and Emma's life returned to being somewhat normal as it was before, at least for a little while. Though no one knew it at the time, it would come out years later that throughout this so-called normal time in her life, after the first exorcism had been performed and she'd essentially been deemed cured, she was still hearing, for all of these years, several voices in her head most of the time that no one else was ever able to hear. If her behavior had been due to demonic or evil forces having taken her over, that exorcism only served to send whatever was inside of her into hiding because the situation was far from over. And that does happen more often than I think you guys could possibly imagine. That they're just like, okay, they're not going to stop trying to get us out of here, so let's just retreat for a while. Time works differently in spirit. 40 years to us is like 10 seconds to them. Doesn't even work in seconds and minutes. It's unfathomable. Evil and lower vibrational entities, demons specifically, are very sneaky like that, and they will not hesitate to stay off the surface of a person for a long time, essentially allowing everyone around the possessed to let their guard down and think it's over with. They're patient and they're dubious, and they have no issue with tricking the living into thinking they're no longer there. They hate us, and hate is even a small word for how demons feel about humans, and they enjoy the terror the person feels knowing they're still there, but not being able to tell anyone for fear of how they'll be perceived, or not wanting to tell anyone for fear that they're going to seem crazy, or of having to go through the oftentimes brutal process of exorcism again. In 1928, the demons would show themselves again. According to what Carl Vogel had written in the Catholic Church-sanctioned publication, Satan Be Gone, by the time Emma was 40 years old, she had long returned to being a deeply devout Catholic, but it all was about to go horribly wrong again. Or maybe it already had, or had always been very, very wrong. So once again, she began to have an aversion to the church and the holy objects within it. Vogel wrote, quote, "Some interior hidden power was interfering with her plans," end quote. He said these voices spoke to her and compelled her to carry out, quote, "most disagreeable," end quote, acts. He also wrote, quote, "The poor creature," meaning Emma herself, "was helpless and secretly was of the opinion that she would become insane," end quote. Early that same year, Father Reisinger arrived in town to speak at the St. Joseph Parish. He asked the local pastor there if he could bring Emma to Erling for another exorcism, having heard what she had been going through and struggling with in the past few years of her life. Emma lived so far away from Erling that Reisinger thought and hoped that it would keep word from getting out about her having to have another exorcism, bringing her from her hometown to there. The local pastor, Reverend Joseph Steiger, got permission for the exorcism to be performed by the local bishop, as is customary in the church before anything like that can be done on anyone. I know that nowadays you also need permission from the Catholic Church, like in Rome, And it's been that way since at least the 50s. If you remember the other night when we discussed Annalise Michel and what happened to her. However, apparently the approval and permission of the pastor and the bishop was enough in this case, and they called for Emma to be brought to Erling to see a Father Reisinger right away. She was brought to the convent of the Franciscan Sisters, which was located just outside of town. They wanted all of this to be kept quiet and away from prying eyes as much as humanly possible. Soon after the prescribed prayers of the church were begun, the woman sank into unconsciousness and remained in that state throughout the period of exorcism. Her eyes were closed up so tightly that no one could force them open, end quote. Not too long after the exorcism began, though, Emma was able to free herself from the bonds they had created to keep her held back and subdued. So she was like, the demons were like pretending to be unconscious. She basically threw the nuns that were holding her off of her, and they were not able to hold her back despite having been deemed the strongest nuns of the bunch. However, she didn't get up and run and try to get away, and she didn't really attack anyone. According to Vogel, she began to levitate straight up in the air while still in a lying down position, and then something incredibly creepy and bizarre happened, at least in my opinion, as I picture this whole scene in my head. He wrote, quote, "Her body carried through the air, landing high above the door of the room and clung to the wall with a tenacious grip. All present were stuck trembling in fear. Father Theophilus alone kept his peace," end quote. The nuns acted fast, though, and they immediately grabbed her, clawing, kicking, and screaming, basically fighting with all of her might for them to leave her there, literally climbing the walls and to get their hands off her. Eventually, and within only a minute or two, the nuns succeeded and had her down on the bed again and strapped down once more. Whenever Father Reisinger would even so much as approach her with the blessed item, she would curse God, and she wouldn't eat anything that had been blessed. They were apparently trying to feed her blessed food to torment the entities inside of her from the inside out. It's akin to asking her to drink blessed holy water. Emma never saw the blessings take place and was just randomly able, seemingly so, to know which foods were blessed and which weren't. After a while of her simply refusing the food altogether, she started to expel large amounts of what Vogel described as unusually foul-smelling and green vomit. According to a local newspaper who had somehow gotten wind of what was happening, despite my not knowing or being able to find who their inside source was, sounds like maybe it was Vogel, but I'm not sure that he was there. Voices came from Emma's chest, and they claimed that they were demons who were possessing her. The entities, or whatever they were, continuously threatened the priests and nuns with copious amounts of severe violence. Emma's body twisted and convulsed, just like you would imagine, and that we always see on television and in the movies when someone is being exorcised. She was tied to the iron bed frame as she twisted and fought to be set free. Sometimes she would somehow become light enough to levitate off of that bed and away from the frame, but she wasn't able to, or maybe she just plainly didn't, break the shackles again. At other times, she became heavy enough that when she would come down from the levitation, she would bend the bottom frame holding the bed as she switched back and forth from being able to float and levitate in the air, light as a feather, and then crashing down with enough heaviness and force to bend iron with nothing but the weight of her very thin, wiry, and wraith-like body. It made no sense. As the entities possessing Emma Schmidt left her body, they were said to have shouted, according to Vogel and others that were there that day, quote, "Beelzebub, Judas, Jacob, Mina," end quote, over and over again. Now, I don't know if Emma's Aunt Mina, who was the one who was said to have started this whole thing in the first place, and who was allegedly a witch that for whatever reason cursed and spelled some herbs and put them in the girl's food from when she was very young numerous times, but I would be willing to bet that that was indeed what happened and that she was indeed doing that. I don't understand how that works because human beings cannot ever under any circumstances become demons. But I was thinking about it after making that same statement in the Annalise Michel case the other night, and spirits, good and bad, are both able to jump human beings' bodies once they learn how to do it, but good spirits would just never do such a thing. So maybe that's how they were able to join the fray, the possession in both Annalise's and Emma's case, but that's just speculation on my part, meaning Annalise, they were saying Hitler and Judas. Those were human beings at one time, so they couldn't have been demons. Demons may have jumped them and overtook them. I'm not sure how it works. Maybe the same with Aunt Mina there. The second exorcism of Emma Schmidt lasted 23 days, and once the entities lost their purchase on her and her body, they were gone for good. I don't have any more information about what happened to Emma afterwards, except that she once again became a devout Catholic and lived a long and relatively healthy life. She was never, as far as what I was able to find in my research, attacked by demonic forces or possessed by them or any other entities or spirits ever again. And that, ladies and gentlemen, would be where this would have ended had it not been for another strange case of a real and somewhat well-documented, very well-documented exorcism, which is what we're going to discuss next in this video. That's the exorcism of Robbie Manheim. Let's move right along with his case, shall we? Let's first talk about what lurks behind the very thin veneer of what we call reality. Do any of us really know what it is or what's there, just beyond what our eyes can see and what our spirits can conceive? Are there powerful entities that harbor some sort of innate and very potent desire to take over, or at the very least to inhabit our bodies, minds, souls, and beings? Yes. Throughout history, as we know, there have been cases where things like that were thought to have happened, and an exorcism was said to be in order for the unfortunate person who was dealing with all of it. There's nowhere else for them to turn at that point, usually, and exorcism seems like their only hope and their only way out. Mysterious Universe said, quote, "Throughout history, there have been those terrifying occasions when exorcisms have been deemed necessary. Whether these incidents are the result of genuine demon infestation or of mental problems exhibited on a grand scale, it is certain that in some cases there has been an urgent perceived need to purge the entities that inhibit some poor soul from their physical form. One of the most terrifying real exorcisms there is revolves around a young boy and went on to transcend a mere exorcism to influence the whole public consciousness of exorcisms in general and serve as a direct inspiration for what has often been exalted as one of the scariest movies ever put to film." End quote. Yeah, that's right, guys. I have finally decided to face my fears and delve just a little deeper into the so-called exorcist case. And then I ended up with these, okay? Because I forgot to do a protection ritual before I started the research. That's why you're not getting this on Halloween. It all began in Cottage City, Maryland in 1948. There lived a 13-year-old boy who has been given the pseudonym Robbie Manheim. He was an only child in a German Lutheran family. Robbie was studious, but he was also described as quiet, shy, and without any friends. His playmates consisted solely of his family members, with his best friend being his Aunt Harriet. Harriet was a spiritualist, and because of that, she had numerous and all sorts of occult objects and things like that in her possession and in her home. One of the things she always had around her was a Ouija board, and when Robbie one day expressed an interest in the board, Aunt Harriet was more than willing and all too happy to show him how to use it. Guys, this really aggravates and angers me because the innocence of a child's spirit is the most pure and natural thing on the planet, and subjecting it and the child himself to something so out of control and dangerous, in my opinion, is child abuse. Many people back then, so-called spiritualists included, thought the board was innocent fun. Remember I think it's about a week ago from when I'm giving you guys this video, we discussed the history of the modern Ouija board, and back then, just like today, it was marketed as a game. Meaning, even people who knew about spirits and spirituality, and even self-proclaimed and so-called spiritualists, thought that it was a game to play with the family, and Harriet was no different. She and Robbie would play the board all of the time during warm summer days and into the night. However, once they started playing, Robbie became obsessed, and his obsession was fed by his Aunt Harriet's willingness to continuously subject him to the dangers and perils of the board, until the day she died suddenly and without warning in January of 1949. It's said she died of natural causes, but a lot of people who have studied and investigated this case felt that the board and all the time she was spending playing it with her innocent nephew had something to do with it. Harriet's death devastated little Robbie. Remember, she was basically his only friend, and once she was gone and buried, he was desperate to have her back, or to at least contact her. Of course, he used the Ouija board they had used together so much as a means to attempt to contact her, thinking that maybe because they had connected to one another over the board so many times while she was alive, it was almost certain that she would know how to use the board as a way to communicate with him from the beyond. This poor kid. Anyway, this is where people say the story of Robbie Manheim got bizarre and very, very terrifying. Not long after Aunt Harriet died, Robbie's whole family, the ones he lived with in his home, started to experience an escalating series of strange and unexplained events. At first, no one thought anything about it because it started out as fairly innocuous. It didn't seem like they had anything to worry about or to fear. It sounded like water dripping from somewhere unknown. They were never able to find the source, and there was also scratching coming from inside the walls. At At first, the family chalked it up to bad plumbing and rodents, and Robbie's dad even tore the walls down in certain areas where they would most hear the scratching, and there was no sign of any sort of rodent infestation like rats or mice, and there was also nothing at all wrong with the plumbing, as they had a professional plumber come in and go through every square inch of piping in the house. The family simply tried to ignore everything, thinking it was strange, but not to the point where they were concerned anything terrible was happening, or really even that anything was wrong. They just thought it was weird. However, it would quickly escalate and get to the point where there was no way for them to continue ignoring what was going on. The sounds of scratching and rippling water were soon accompanied by the sounds of marching and stomping feet all throughout the house all night long. The family were woken up more times than they could have counted by those new noises. At all hours of the day and night, the family also started hearing knocking sounds coming from nowhere, and when no one else was around, tapping and banging accompanied those, and they sounded like they were coming from inside of the walls and underneath the floorboards, but there was never any discernible cause, despite the family trying their best to figure out where it was all originating and what was going on. Those seemingly innocuous and inexplicable sounds were quickly graduated to full-blown poltergeist activity, with furniture moving all over the house of its own accord, with it sliding all around the rooms and even levitating off the ground and landing, sometimes crashing down on and to the floor below it. Pictures would randomly fall off walls, and the chandelier would inexplicably swing violently back and forth, all on its own. The family, Robbie included, had no idea whether or not it was merely Aunt Harriet trying to make contact, or if something much more sinister was going on. But they would soon find out for themselves, and it was something more horrifying and terrifying than any of them could ever have possibly imagined. Know this, guys. Even if a spirit that you're comfortable with, like in this case, if it was Aunt Harriet, were trying to play a prank on you or a trick on you, if they were a trickster in real life, they'll be a trickster in spirit. As soon as they see it's troubling you, causing you great stress, or scaring you, or causing you to spend money you don't have on like plumbers and people going in your walls, they'll stop. They won't ever do it again. It won't continue, because they don't even like have the ability to be able to make humans feel so scared and so terrible. They're about love and peace and light, which is exactly what we should be about while we're here, but that's a whole other video. The paranormal occurrences started to increase in frequency, and as the days wore on, it grew more malicious and more violent in nature. Glasses started to fly across the room and shatter into a million little shards. Pictures, especially those with religious imagery, and to which the extremely devout family had many, would shatter or fly off the walls and land crashing down to the floor or against the other walls. Right around that time, Robbie himself started receiving scratch marks, bite marks, welts, and bruises that there seemed to have been no explanation for, and on one occasion, his mother heard a commotion coming from his room. She heard him screaming in terror, and so she went into his bedroom to investigate what was happening and saw Robbie in the bed with the bed shaking violently, seemingly trying to throw the boy off of it. All of the strange activity seemed to have been focused mainly on Robbie, and whatever it was that was causing all of the activity even followed him to school. On at least one occasion, his entire class and teacher witnessed his desk sliding out from under him as he sat there doing nothing at all, and it went clear across the room and crashed into some other students' desks. It was obvious, according to witnesses, that Robbie hadn't pushed it or done anything else to otherwise cause the desk to move the way it did. Throughout all of this activity, Robbie's behavior changed, and so did his personality, and they both seemed to change significantly. It was constantly deteriorating, and the normally timid and quiet young boy would suddenly become very aggressive and prone to angry outbursts and tantrums. He not only became physically violent towards his parents and other family members, but seemingly towards inanimate objects as well. Everyone around him who knew him at the time said that he would sometimes just start shouting a litany of profanities at everyone near him, and it would come out in a voice that sounded nothing like his own. Robbie had never heard, nor had he ever studied Latin, but much of the time the litany of profanity would be spewed forth from him in that language. Robbie's parents suspected something very strange was happening to their son, and they sought medical help for him quickly. He would go on to see a string of doctors, psychiatrists, psychologists, but no one had any answers for the desperate family. They were told there was nothing wrong with Robbie and that there was no scientific or medical explanation or diagnoses for his terrible and strange behavior. Without any answers, the family watched helplessly as the activity continued unabated and escalated even more. Robbie descended even worse into his violent behaviors and outbursts, and finally his parents turned to the church. They were put into contact with Reverend Luther Miles Schulz for help. The Reverend was skeptical when he first heard about what was happening with the boy, but he eventually agreed to go to the house and stay a night in order to complete a thorough investigation. He would not be disappointed. During his time in the house, the Reverend watched in horror as the boy's bed would violently shake and rattle with him inside of it, even as he tried to sleep. He also heard numerous scratching and banging noises all throughout the house, as the family had originally reported. He also witnessed the furniture sliding around the room for no apparent reason. It really shook him up, and he felt like he had no choice but to conclude that an evil force was present in the home and that it was focused on Robbie. He initially performed a very simple and somewhat easy Lutheran rite of exorcism, but it had absolutely no effect on anything. It didn't do anything at all. That's when he knew he was in over his head, and in wanting to help the family, he referred them to a Roman Catholic priest by the name of Edward Hughes. Hughes, on the advice of the Reverend, reluctantly agreed to meet with the boy himself. When Hughes arrived at the house to meet Robbie, he was unnerved by the boy's cold stare and dark gaze. He described it by saying that Robbie, quote, looked as if there was nothing behind the eyes, end quote. That was scary enough, according to the priest, but what happened next was what would convince him that Robbie was under attack by demonic forces and that he needed a full-blown exorcism. When Hughes put the Bible on the table across from the boy, the chair the priest was sitting in began to vibrate and violently shake. Then it levitated off the floor and in the air while he still sat in it. Hughes was shaken by the incident, understandably so, and he asked Robbie in Latin, "Who are you?" Robbie had an intimidating response, which was also delivered in Latin. He said, quote, "I am legions," end quote. The response was unsettling for two reasons. The first reason was because Robbie had no way of understanding Latin and didn't speak it at all. And secondly, legions implied that there was more than one diabolical entity residing inside of the young boy. Hughes was entirely confident that Robbie needed a Catholic exorcism, but he wasn't so sure about his ability to personally carry it out. He didn't have any previous experience with exorcisms, and should he perform one on Robbie, it would have been his very first. Hughes wanted to keep the environment controlled, and so he moved Robbie to Georgetown University Hospital, which was a Jesuit hospital in the local area. The Jesuit brothers in the hospital agreed to monitor the exorcism there. As soon as Robbie was brought into the hospital, he showed a strong aversion to it. He immediately became extremely volatile and started screaming obscenities, kicking, spitting, thrashing his body around, and even hissing. He became so violent and out of control that the nurses there were forced to restrain him with wrist straps for the duration of the exorcism. Father Hughes then spent the following 3 nights reciting the exorcism rites over and over again, but it seemed to have had no effect other than making Robbie more violent and more out of control. He foamed at the mouth and directed a barrage of insults at the priest more than once. On the final night they were there, either Robbie or whatever was controlling him managed to slip one arm out of the wrist restraints, and he then proceeded to quickly and efficiently rip open the bed, rip out a bed spring, and slash the priest from wrist to elbow with it. Isn't it crazy? Where is it? I guess it's not wrist to elbow, but just so you guys know, I'm not scared. I got this. That should have taken way more strength than a boy Robbie's size and of his age should have had. The wound was egregious, and it prompted Father Hughes to call the exorcism off. And while he went home to recover from the injury, quite unbelievably, Robbie was also sent back to his house. Robbie's family, for whatever reason, thought that it would be a good time to travel. So they visited relatives in St. Louis, where they spoke to a priest and professor at St. Louis University by the name of Raymond Bishop. Bishop referred them to another priest named William Bodern, who was a senior priest at the Diocese of St. Louis. The two priests went together to visit the relative's home, and immediately upon sensing their presence there, Robbie went on a violent and maniacal tirade, which he delivered in a deep and guttural voice that was not his own. Robbie showed an extreme hatred towards the Bible and other religious items and imagery, and they too witnessed the furniture being tossed, slid, and thrown all around the house. Father Bodern knew all about Father Hughes' disastrously failed exorcism attempt on Robbie at the Jesuit hospital, and that it had almost been catastrophic for all involved. For his exorcism, he wanted to make sure he was not only well prepared, but well protected, a bit more protected, and he enlisted the help of 2 more priests by the names of Walter Halloran and Reverend William Van Roo. And once again, it would take place in a Jesuit institution, but this time it was the Alexian Brothers Hospital. For the safety of the boy and everyone around him, the exorcism was going to be conducted in a room in the psychiatric ward of the hospital. It was soundproof, had no furniture in it or any windows, and the door couldn't be opened from the inside. So basically a padded cell. I don't know if it was actually padded, but basically a psych room. When he first confronted the group of priests that were there to do battle with the evil within him, Robbie immediately began to spit in their faces and unleashed a barrage of profanities, which included him sexually propositioning the priests, insulting their families, and threatening them with extreme violence. He also lashed out physically, and it was noted that he was hitting them with a supernatural strength that was far beyond what should have been normal for his age and his size, just like before. The three full-grown men also had a hard time restraining the child themselves as he became increasingly violent. One time, they even resorted to shoving a pillow down over his face to restrain him, just so they can get him back into the wrist and leg restraints. But Robbie wasn't always so aggressive during the exorcism, and in all of the priest's diaries, it was mentioned that he sometimes went into calm states of tranquility and lucidity, during which he would just stare at them with thoughtful malevolence, and the priest said that those times were more disturbing a lot of the time than when he was in his violent fits and rages. The priests pressed on with the exorcism over the course of the next 6 weeks, and during that time, a wide variety of strange things would happen. At times, scratches and welts would appear on his body, with some of them purportedly etching out words like evil and hell, which normally would appear on either his chest or his stomach in real time and right before their very eyes. As they watched, these words were carved into this boy from the inside out. They also witnessed the bed shaking, and the little bit of furniture that was in the room would topple over on its own, and that was normally as a result of the holy water being brought out. Whatever was inhabiting Robbie Manheim was infuriated by the mere sight of holy water, let alone when it was sprinkled on him. After weeks of unsuccessful efforts and 30 failed exorcisms that tried to rid the boy of the demons that dwelt within him, and with Father Bodern in particular, along with the others, growing very weary, exhausted, and becoming beset by fatigue, they decided to do one more thing in a last-ditch effort to save this little boy from the demonic darkness that had taken up residence inside of him. They planned to force him to take Holy Communion and to baptize him. The rationale for that was to convert him to Catholicism, as if you remember, he was not Catholic but Lutheran when all of this was plaguing him and going on, and that in doing that, he would become more susceptible to the exorcism rites being performed on him and to the commands of the Roman Catholic priests. The demons, though, had other plans. When presented with the communion water, Robbie flew into an unrelenting and diabolical fury, reportedly tossing the men across the room, all three of them at once, with supernatural and superhuman strength, unlike that of anything which could normally be attributed to a boy of his age and size. He hit Father Halloran so hard that he shattered the man's nose. With one last all-out effort, the priests were able to restrain Robbie just long enough to be able to force the Holy Communion water down his throat, with his teeth snapping at their fingers the entire time. From the reports of the priest's diaries, which is where all of the information on this case I've given you so far have come from, it seems all that was missing was his head doing a 360 like an owl and him spewing pea soup all over the place. It's funny, but it's not. There was no change in Robbie after all of this, though, not for several days after the communion, and he was said to have remained just as evil and animalistic as he was before. But then, one day, something strange happened. One day he woke up and in a very calm, very clear voice, a voice that sounded incredibly commanding despite how calm it also sounded, he proclaimed, quote, "Satan, Satan, I am Saint Michael, and I command you, Satan, and the other evil spirits to leave the body now," end quote. Now, as most of you already know, or maybe you don't, Archangel Michael is the angel who is said to have originally expelled Satan and his minions from heaven, and Michael is also said to be the one angel who has the most power over the devil himself. After proclaiming that sentence, the evil forces and demonic entities seemed to just leave right out of Robbie for once and for all. They were suddenly gone, and there was suddenly the feeling of calmness that overtook everyone and everything in the room that day immediately. The exorcism of Robbie Manheim, or Roland Doe, had finally worked. After all of it was over, Robbie started attending Mass regularly, and he even returned to school. Things slowly began to go back to normal, to how they were before the possession. He never exhibited any more signs of possession, and he actually didn't remember much of anything that happened during the whole time. He wasn't cognizant of most of what had happened. By all accounts, it said that he went on to have a normal life, and in order to protect his privacy, the family never released his real name to the public and asked that no one involved in the case do so either. This had already taken so much from the little boy's life, and no one wanted to take any more from him. Remarkably, everyone involved in the incident went to great lengths and did everything that they could do to guard his real identity. He's only known by one of two names, Robbie Manheim or Roland Doe, and his true identity remains a mystery to many to this very day, but not to everyone. His real name was Ronald Hunkeler, and he ended up being an engineer for NASA. He died in 2020, a month before he would turn 86 years old, from a stroke at his home in Maryland. His work contributed to the Apollo space missions in the 60s, and he patented a technology that helped space shuttle panels withstand extreme heat. One of his friends at NASA said that he was always on edge about his colleagues and superiors at NASA finding out who he really was and about the exorcisms performed on him. He didn't want anyone to know. Also, obviously, he was worried they would find out that he was the boy who was the inspiration for the iconic and legendary movie, The Exorcist. Yeah, I can see how that would be concerning, you know, especially to someone, you're a scientist, like, and you're talking about demonic possession. I could see where that would be a little tricky. He retired from NASA in 2001 after working there for 40 years. In total, more than 40 people witnessed the exorcism of this young man, who went on to do something fabulous with his life. Despite many of his friends at NASA said he lived in a constant state of fear and anxiety. Not that the demons would return. He wasn't worried about that. He was worried that others in his world then, in NASA and all around him, wouldn't be so understanding, and that they would uncover who he really was and what he had really been through. As I mentioned earlier, the events that took place when you're only looking to get like the facts, not the Hollywood or dramatized version, come from very detailed diaries kept by all of the priests involved. Of course, I would like to briefly mention what the skeptics have to say about all of this. Here's a long quote from one source I found that, to a skeptic, would explain and sum up all of this in a nice and neat little package. As I always say, it's a little too neatly wrapped up for me, though. Here it is. Quote, in his 1993 book, Possessed, The True Story of an Exorcism, author Thomas B. Allen offered the consensus of today's experts that Robbie was just a deeply disturbed boy and there was nothing supernatural about him. Author Mark Opsenek questioned many of the supernatural claims associated with this story, proposing that Roland Doe was simply a spoiled, disturbed bully who threw deliberate tantrums to get attention or to get out of having to go to school. Opasnik reports that Halloran, who was present at the exorcism, never heard the boy's voice change, and he thought the boy merely mimicked Latin words he heard clergymen say, rather than gaining a sudden ability to speak Latin. Opasnik reported that when marks were found on the boy's body, Halloran failed to check the boy's fingernails to see if he had made the marks himself. Opasnik also questioned the story of Hughes's attempts to exorcise the boy and his subsequent injury, saying he could find no evidence that such an episode had actually occurred, other than in the diary, I suppose. To writers and film/video producers, this was a great story to exploit for profit. And one way or another, whether you believe in it or not, that stands true. Those involved saw what they were trained to see. Each purported to look at the facts, but just the opposite was true. In actuality, they manipulated the facts and emphasized information that fit their own agendas and narratives. Opasnik wrote that after he located and spoke with neighbors and childhood friends of the boy, most of whom he only referenced by initials, he concluded that, quote, the boy had been a very clever trickster who had pulled pranks to frighten his mother and to fool children in the neighborhood, end quote. Continuing, quote, skeptic Joe Nickel wrote that there was simply no credible evidence to suggest the boy was possessed by demons or evil spirits, and maintains that the symptoms of possession can be childishly simple to fake. Nickel dismissed suggestions that supernatural forces made scratches or markings or caused words to appear on the teenager's body in unreachable places, saying a determined youth, probably even without a wall mirror, could easily have managed such a feat if it actually occurred. Although the scratched messages proliferated, they never again appeared on a difficult-to-reach portion of the boy's anatomy. On one occasion, the boy was reportedly seen scratching the words hell and Christ on his chest using his own fingernails. According to Nickel, nothing that was reliably reported in this case was beyond the ability of a teenager to produce. The tantrums, trances, moved furniture, hurled objects, automatic writing, superficial scratches, and other phenomena were just the kinds of things someone of R's age could accomplish, just as others have done before and since. Indeed, the elements of poltergeist phenomenon, spirit communication, and demonic possession, taken both separately and especially together, as one progressed to the other, suggest nothing so much as role-playing involving trickery. Nickel also dismissed stories of the boy's prodigious strength, saying he showed nothing more than what could be summoned by an agitated teenager, and criticized popular accounts of the exorcism for what he termed a stereotypical storybook portrayal of the devil, end quote. Interesting. So you're calling at least 4 priests liars. And not only are they liars, they wrote all of these lies down in their own personal, private diaries in case someone would read them someday. I don't know. Does that make sense to you guys? To me, most of what I just read to you all right there is presumptuous and ridiculous and just as speculative as they claim everything else is, that they say the actual facts on this case are. They tend to say that the boy was spoiled rotten and would constantly throw tantrums and abuse the adults around him, both his parents and everyone else, in order to get what he wanted when he wanted it. And some people are convinced it simply went too far. Once Robbie saw what was happening with the priests and saw all of the attention he was getting, he knew there was no turning back. They say he was mentally ill, though I have looked through countless papers and documents regarding this case in order to do this video and couldn't find one single diagnosis about the boy's mental health at the time that leaned in that direction. Meaning, according to the doctors, and there were many who examined him, medical professionals here, there was nothing mentally wrong with Robbie Manheim. Also, let's look at the facts of the supernatural strength. He wasn't a very big boy, and also what he said at the end there about St. Michael. Finally, I have a hard time believing such a spoiled child, as he allegedly was, would be able to deal with months of isolation and keeping up such a draining ruse, abusing and sexually propositioning priests and throwing furniture without moving it. That, my friends, in my humble opinion, is a spiritual problem. It came from the Ouija board, and of that I am 100, nay, 1,000, 1,000,000% sure. That's all I have for you today, guys. Please give this video a big thumbs up if you enjoyed the content, if you enjoyed hanging out with me, and if you enjoyed hanging out with one another in the premiere. Spread the love, please, by sharing this video. I am 44 or 45 subscribers away from 3,000. Subscribe if you haven't already. Make sure your notification bell is turned on to all, because some people have been, for a while now, having issues with their notifications being notified of videos and live streams. As I mentioned in last Tuesday's afternoon talk, I'm going to be extending the contest, the kind of raffle of the 3 spiritual helper boxes, with first prize being a power box, which is going to contain so much stuff, guys. A lot of it handcrafted and homemade by me, but a lot of it just bits and bobs and crystals and jewelry and this, that, and the other. Gnomes and all sorts of stuff that I've been picking up to do these boxes. There's an extra large, a large, and a medium for 2nd and 3rd place. All you have to do for that is purchase $20 only to my PayPal or Cash App a personal reading for December. So you're also going to get a reading. You'll be entered to win. Not enough people did it for November, so instead of doing a Halloween thing, it's going to be Thanksgiving or when I hit 3,000 subscribers. Guys, thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to check out the description box, ways to donate to the channel, PayPal, Cash App, Patreon, my Amazon wish list gift link, links for all of my books on Amazon, Kindle, and paperback in the description box as well. That's Missing the Faith Theory, Encounters with Evil, 101 True and Terrifying Stories, and my 3rd book, which was released last December, I believe, maybe November, Shadow Entities, Sleep Paralysis, and Beyond. And I am 1 chapter away from finishing the book about the black-eyed kids, so that should be out in December or January at the very latest. Don't forget to check us out on Tuesdays at 1 p.m., myself and Ghost Dragon CW, for afternoon talk. Also, while Ghost Dragons is traveling, I'm not sure if there's going to be a Wednesday night stream or a Thursday night stream. If so, on Thursday night, you will either have Miss Paranormal Pixie or Mr. Ghost Dragons. On Friday or Saturday of the week you're watching this, it's going to either be live replays by Ghost Dragon CW of my old videos or live intuitive oracle. I will keep you posted throughout the week, as I always do. Be kind to each other, guys. It doesn't cost anything. Be kind to yourselves and never accept anything less than others being kind to you. If no one told you today, you're amazing, you're beautiful, you are awesome. You can do anything you want to do and anything that you put your mind to. You just have to believe in yourself. And if no one else believes in you, that's okay. I believe in you. I got your back. Believe in yourself. Always go in grace, smile at a stranger, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.